The letter from Dr. Reeves arrived on a Monday. Routine follow-up, the kind that comes after a quarterly cardiac monitoring appointment. Results, observations, recommended adjustments to medication. Nothing alarming. I read it at the kitchen table with my coffee. Then I called Dr. Reeves to discuss one question about the medication adjustment. His assistant put me through immediately. We spoke for 8 minutes. I thanked him. I hung up. I went to the garden. I was there for 40 minutes. When I came back inside, I noticed something. The letter was gone from the kitchen table. I had left it face up beside my coffee cup. It was not there. I checked the counter, the chair, the floor. I walked through the house. Nothing. I called Lucas. He said, "Mom, hi, how are you feeling?" I said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "No reason, just checking in." I said, "Lucas, were you here this morning?" Silence. He said, "Nicole stopped by. She had a spare key from the last time she just wanted to drop something off. You were in the garden." I said, "And the letter on my kitchen table?" A longer silence. I said, "Lucas, what did Nicole do with the letter from Dr. Reeves?" He said, "Mom, we need to talk." I said, "Yes, come tonight, both of you." I already knew what the talk would be about. What I did not know yet was what they had done in the 3 hours since Nicole had read that letter. My name is Eleanor Brooks, 63 years old, Connecticut, retired teacher. I have a heart condition. Not serious in the way that word is used when people mean immediately life-threatening. Managed. Monitored. The kind of condition that a woman my age addresses with medication and quarterly appointments, and the practical acceptance that certain things require attention. Dr. Reeves has been my cardiologist for 4 years. He is thorough and direct, and we have a productive working relationship built on his understanding that I prefer accurate information to comfortable reassurance. The Monday letter was a routine follow-up. The results showed a minor change in one measurement, within normal variance for my condition. Dr. Reeves recommended a small adjustment to one medication. He wanted to see me in 6 weeks rather than 12. 6 weeks rather than 12. That was the only departure from the ordinary. I had spoken with him for 8 minutes. He had explained the change. He had answered my question. He had said, "Eleanor, you are doing well. This is maintenance, not emergency." Those were his exact words. Maintenance, not emergency. I had gone to the garden feeling entirely settled. What happened while I was in the garden, I did not know precisely until Lucas and Nicole arrived that evening. But let me tell you what I suspected. I suspected it because of something that had happened 3 weeks earlier. Lucas had come for Sunday dinner. After the meal, while I was making coffee, he had asked me something he had never asked before. He said, "Mom, your accounts, the investment ones, are they organized? In terms of access, in case something happens?" I said, "Patricia has everything she needs. The documents are current." He said, "But if something were to happen quickly, if there was not time for Patricia to—" I said, "Lucas, why are you asking me this?" He said, "I just want to make sure you are taken care of." I said, "I am taken care of. Patricia ensures that." He said, "But Patricia is not family." I said, "Patricia does not need to be family. She needs to be competent. She is both thorough and competent." He said, "I just think family should have more visibility into these things." I said, "Visibility into what things specifically?" He said, "The accounts, the property arrangements, what happens to what." I had looked at my son across the kitchen table. I said, "The December review was 2 weeks ago. You know the current arrangements." He said, "The broad shape, not the specifics." I said, "The specifics are Patricia's domain. That has always been the arrangement." He had said nothing more, but I had noted the conversation. I had called Patricia the following Monday. I said, "Lucas asked me about account access last Sunday, about what happens if something occurs quickly." Patricia said, "I see." I said, I want to review the emergency protocols. What access exists, what does not, and I want to make sure nothing can move without my direct authorization. She said, I will have a review document prepared by Wednesday. I had signed 4 updated authorization forms on Wednesday. Nothing could move without my signature or Patricia's formal power of attorney activation. That had been 2 weeks ago. And then the letter arrived from Dr. Reeves. And Nicole had come with a spare key while I was in the garden, and the letter had disappeared from my kitchen table. I called Margaret while I was waiting for Lucas and Nicole to arrive. I said, Margaret, has there been any unusual activity on any of my accounts today? She said, I will check immediately. She called back in 11 minutes. She said, Eleanor, at 2:17 this afternoon, someone attempted to access your primary investment account online. The attempt failed. The new authorization protocol blocked it. I said, 2:17. The letter had been gone when I came in from the garden at approximately 2:30. Margaret said, the access attempt came from an IP address registered to a Nicole Ann Harris Brooks. I said, thank you, Margaret. I sat at my kitchen table. I thought about the letter. Maintenance, not emergency. Those were Dr. Reeves's words. Nicole had read something different, and within hours she had tried to move. If you have ever had someone read something about your health and immediately think about what it meant for them, stay with me, because what Lucas and Nicole said when they arrived that evening is something I will not forget. Subscribe and hit the bell. I post every week. They arrived at 7, together. Lucas came in first. He looked like a man who had spent 4 hours in a conversation he had not wanted to have and had arrived at my door not knowing how to begin the next one. Nicole came in behind him. She was carrying a casserole dish. She said, I made dinner. I thought you might not have eaten. I looked at the casserole dish. I said, thank you, set it on the counter. We sat at the kitchen table. I placed 3 things on the table. The first was a printout Margaret had sent, the account access attempt, time-stamped, 2:17, Nicole's IP address. The second was a text message exchange I had found on my phone. From this afternoon, Lucas to Nicole at 2:41. She knows. Come home now. He had not known I could see that message. He had sent it from his own phone to hers. But I had been standing beside Lucas's phone on the counter when it chimed at 2:41, and the preview had been visible. The third was a photograph I had found on my own phone, in my photo library, a photograph I had not taken. My bedroom, the dresser drawers partially open, my mother's mirror in the background. The photograph had been taken at 2:09 this afternoon, while I was in the garden. Nicole had not only read the letter and attempted to access my account, she had walked through my house. She had gone into my bedroom. She had opened my dresser drawers, and she had taken a photograph. I placed all 3 items on the table, face up. I looked at Lucas. I looked at Nicole. I said, tell me what happened today. Lucas looked at the table. Nicole looked at the casserole dish on the counter. I said, Nicole, you came to my house this morning. She said, yes. I said, with a spare key. She said, yes. I said, while I was in the garden. She said, yes. I said, you took the letter from my kitchen table. She said, I was worried. When I saw the letterhead, I said, you read my private medical correspondence. She said, I was worried about you. I said, and then you went to my bedroom. She said nothing. I said, and you opened my dresser drawers. She said, I was just looking. I said, at what? She said, at the things. The kitchen was very quiet. I said, the things. She said, Eleanor. I said, you read my medical letter. You attempted to access my investment account. You went to my bedroom and opened my dresser drawers. In the same afternoon, within 40 minutes of reading a letter from my cardiologist. Lucas said, Nicole was scared when she called me. I said, Lucas. He stopped. I said, I want to ask Nicole something directly. I looked at Nicole. I said, "What did you think the letter said?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I thought it said something serious was wrong." I said, "And if something serious was wrong?" She said, "I wanted to understand what the situation was." I said, "What situation specifically?" She said nothing. I said, "The account access, the bedroom, the drawers. Nicole, what situation were you trying to understand?" She said, "I wanted to know." She stopped. I waited. She said, "I wanted to know what the arrangements were, in case things moved quickly." In case things moved quickly? I looked at my daughter-in-law, the woman who had sent 7 sentences from a place of fear, who had published my private life for 4,000 strangers, who had known about the Airbnb LLC for 3 weeks, who had come to my kitchen with lavender and white roses on a Sunday in October and asked for a real conversation, who had, today, read a letter from my cardiologist and within 40 minutes attempted to access my investment account and open the drawers of my bedroom dresser. I said, "Did you read the letter fully?" She said, "Yes." I said, "What did it say?" She said, "It said there was a minor change in one measurement, that you needed a medication adjustment, that Dr. Reeves wanted to see you in 6 weeks." I said, "And?" She said, "And I thought 6 weeks instead of 12 meant." I said, "It means maintenance, not emergency. Those are Dr. Reeves's exact words. I spoke with him this morning for 8 minutes. He said, "Eleanor, you are doing well. This is maintenance, not emergency." She said, "I did not know that." I said, "No, you did not. You read half the picture and acted on the half you chose to see." Lucas said, "Mom, she was scared. I was scared when she called me. We both thought—" I said, "You both thought something was seriously wrong, and your first response was to try to access my accounts and open my bedroom drawers." He said, "That is not—" I said, "Lucas, is that not what happened?" He looked at the table. He said, "Yes, that is what happened." I said, "I want you to hear what you just confirmed." He said, "Yes." I said, "Your mother received a routine medical follow-up letter. Your wife read it without permission, decided something was seriously wrong without calling me or Dr. Reeves, attempted to access my investment accounts, went through my bedroom, and you, when she called you in panic, did not say call Mom, did not say call Dr. Reeves. You said, 'We need to understand the arrangements.'" He said, "I was scared." I said, "I know, fear is real. What you do with it is a choice. If this moment reached something in you, leave me a comment. Tell me if you have ever had someone decide what your situation meant before asking you. I read every single one." I reached into the folder beside my chair. 1 document, 2 pages, Patricia's letterhead. I placed it on the table between them. Lucas looked at it. Nicole looked at it. Page 1 was a summary of the afternoon's events, time-stamped, precise. The letter removed at approximately 2:05, the bedroom photograph taken at 2:09, the account access attempt at 2:17, Lucas's text message at 2:41. Page 2 was a single paragraph. It said, "The property owner and account holder has been made aware of all activity connected to her property and financial accounts on this date. All access attempts have been logged and documented. The authorization protocols established on the 14th of this month remain in effect. No account or property transaction can proceed without the direct written authorization of Eleanor Ann Brooks or the formal activation of power of attorney by Patricia Ann Marsh." Nicole read it twice. She said, "You updated the protocols 2 weeks ago." I said, "Yes." She said, "Before the letter arrived." I said, "Before the letter arrived." She said, "You expected something." I said, "I expected the possibility of something. Lucas asked me about account access 3 weeks ago. I noted the question. I acted on what it suggested." Lucas said, The Sunday dinner conversation. I said, yes. He said, you called Patricia the next day. I said, yes. He said, Mom, we were not planning anything. I said, Lucas, today happened. Those are not plans I am describing. Those are actions that were taken, within 40 minutes of a letter being read. He said nothing. I said, I want to say something to both of you that I mean completely. They looked at me. I said, I am 63 years old. I have a managed heart condition. Dr. Reeves sees me quarterly. I take 2 medications. I exercise. I sleep adequately. I am not planning to die soon. But I am also not going to pretend that I will live forever. I said, there will be a time when the arrangements matter. When the accounts and the property and the documents in Patricia's file become relevant in the way you are thinking about today. I said, but that time is not now. And even when that time comes, the way you behave today is not the way it will happen. Lucas said, how will it happen? I said, it will happen the way everything in this family happens when it is done correctly, with a conversation, with Patricia present, with accurate information, with everyone treated as an adult who deserves to know the truth rather than someone to be managed around. Nicole said, Eleanor. I said, yes. She said, I want to say something that is not an excuse. I said, say it. She said, when I read that letter, I felt the thing I have been afraid of for 3 years, the thing underneath all of it, that one day you will be gone and Lucas and I will be standing in this house without you, and everything that felt certain will not be certain anymore. She looked at her hands. She said, that fear made me stupid today. It made me act before I thought. It made me do things I cannot undo. I said, no, you cannot undo them. She said, I know. I said, Nicole, that fear is real. I understand it. Losing someone changes everything. I know that more precisely than you do. She said, Richard. I said, yes, I know what it is to stand in a house after someone is gone and feel the ground shift. That fear is legitimate. She said, then why? I said, because fear is not permission. Fear tells you what matters. It does not tell you what to do. What you do with the fear is your choice. She said, I made the wrong choice today. I said, yes. She said, what happens now? I said, the document stays in Patricia's file. The account protocols remain in place. The spare key you used today goes back to me tonight. Nicole reached into her bag. She placed the key on the table. I picked it up. I said, thank you. I said, and one more thing. They waited. I said, next week I have an appointment with Dr. Reeves, the 6-week check-in. I would like you both to come with me, not to manage anything, not to understand the arrangements, to meet him, to hear from him directly what maintenance, not emergency, actually means, to have the accurate picture instead of the one you constructed today. Lucas said, you want us there. I said, I want you to have the truth, the full version, from the source, so that the next time a letter arrives and I am in the garden, you already know what it says before you read it. Nicole said, you would do that? I said, yes, you are James's parents. You are Rose's uncle and aunt. You are in this family. The information that belongs to you, I will give you. What does not belong to you, I will keep. She said, how do we know the difference? I said, you ask me. That is how you know. Lucas reached across the table. He put his hand over mine. He said, Mom, I am sorry. I said, I know. He said, we handled this very badly. I said, yes. You did. He said, we will come to Dr. Reeves. I said, good. He said, and the key. I said, when the time is right, I will give you a key again. Earned, not assumed. He said, okay. Nicole stood up. She went to the counter. She brought back the casserole dish. She said, you have not eaten. I looked at the casserole dish. I said, Set it on the table. We ate, the three of us, at my kitchen table, with the documents still visible on the table between us and the key sitting beside my coffee cup and a casserole that Nicole had made at some point during the afternoon between reading the letter and coming to my door. She had made dinner, even in the middle of everything. That was something. Not enough, but something. It is Wednesday morning. Dr. Reeves confirmed the appointment for next Tuesday. I told him Lucas and Nicole would be joining me. He said, "Of course, that is always welcome." I said, "They had some concerns based on the letter." He said, "I will go through everything with them directly. Numbers, context, what we are watching and why." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Eleanor, you are doing well." I said, "I know. I needed them to hear that from you." He understood. Lucas called last night. He said, "Mom, next Tuesday. We will be there." I said, "Good." He said, "I have been thinking about what you said, about fear not being permission." I said, "Yes." He said, "I think I have been operating from fear for a long time, about you, about the house, about what happens when things change." I said, "Yes, I know." He said, "It makes me do stupid things." I said, "It does, yes." He said, "How do I stop?" I said, "You ask me directly, about the things you are afraid of, before the fear makes the decision for you." He said, "And you will tell me the truth?" I said, "I have always told you the truth. You have not always asked." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Mom, are you okay?" I said, "I am doing well. Dr. Reeves's words, maintenance, not emergency." He said, "I am glad." I said, "I know you are. That is the part that matters. The key is on my kitchen windowsill. The account protocols are in place. The document is in Patricia's file. And on Tuesday morning, I will sit in Dr. Reeves's office with my son and my daughter-in-law, and the three of us will hear the same words at the same time. Maintenance, not emergency." The truth is always simpler than the fear. The problem is that fear arrives first. And for 40 minutes on a Monday afternoon, it moved faster than anyone stopped to think. The casserole was good. I will not pretend otherwise. Leave me a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Has someone ever made a decision about your life based on fear before asking you what was actually true? Tell me what they assumed and what the truth actually was. I read every single one. And if this story reached something in you today, subscribe.